Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Ibram Kendi?
This is Ibram.
Hello, this is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tape. Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this program. I'm really, really delighted. Tell me, where do I find you, and if you could give me a sense of what you've been up to for the last 4 months of this quarantine period?
I think what have I not been up to is probably a better question.
I know. Just reading about everything that's happening in your life is just daunting.
Yeah, and it certainly has been daunting and intense. But I thought I'd have extra time during this quarantine, and I probably have less time than I ever had.
Yeah, no, it's tremendous to also read, what has happened to you and your work. And I'd like to start with a quotation by Martin Luther King, who sometimes quoted himself Cicero, who said, "Freedom is participation in power." What does that mean to you?
Freedom is participation in power. I think what I often talk about is that when we think of freedom, we should think about we have to recognize that power comes before freedom.
Yeah.
In other words, that having the ability to choose between masters or choose between sneakers or to basically make choices is not the same as those who have the power to create choices. And so really to be free is to have the power to create choices for yourself and certainly to share with others in creating just choices for the world.
I was so pleased to read that you're joining Boston University and its extraordinary history, which I was not completely aware of, whether it's Howard Zinn or others who had been there, including Martin Luther King. And you're becoming the founder of a new center. And from the website of the Center for Antiracist Research, I read, whereas racist research historically has posed the question, what is wrong with people? Anti-racist research now asks a different question, a better question. What is wrong with policies? It made me think of this wonderful line of Thomas Pynchon, who said, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. Can you tell us, Ibram, a little bit how you see this shift in perspective and the necessity of this shift in perspective?
Well, to be anti-racist is to recognize that the racial groups are equals, that there's nothing superior or inferior, wrong or right, better or worse with any racial group. And I keep emphasizing group. I'm not saying there's no individual person of, let's say, color who could be working harder, but there are white people who could be working harder too. And so really, there's nothing really wrong with any of the groups. And so to ask what is wrong with the people is to assume that there could be something wrong with one of the groups. And particularly to ask that when there's a racial disparity. Okay, Black people are dying 2.5 times more than white people of COVID-19. Well, what are Black people doing wrong? Is to not be able to get to the question of, what's wrong with our society? What's wrong with policies? Especially if that's that question will lead to the true answers that are the very causes behind that disparity. So we're simply asking the better question. What's wrong with policies? What's wrong with power? What's wrong with structures? What's wrong with society?
The center doesn't yet exist. Is that correct?
So we were to sort of launch July 1, and so we're in the process right now of building up our staff, coming up with our sort of strategic planning, and really envisioning sort of what we're going to sort of do, and we already are managing a COVID racial data tracker, which is tracking racial disparities in real time. And so, of course, we'll be moving on to other projects. We'll be expanding that, but then also moving on to other projects.
I'm really interested in how you build up such a center. How you build up, how you create such a center. What kind of how do you bring together the right people for something like this?
Well, I think at least for us, we're starting with indeed that foundational idea, which is, asking that better question, what's wrong with policies? And then, we're going about building out a structure that allows us to not only ask the right questions, but also provide the right answers, and not only provide the right answers, but even begin to ensure that those policy sort of answers are implemented. And so then we're, of course, building a staffing structure that will give us the ability to do all of that. And then, obviously, finding the right people, it certainly is very, very difficult and critically important.
It must be very difficult. And I'm wondering, it started on July 1st, so very recently, and I'm wondering, in the context of what has been happening over the last 4 or 5 months, if there is a shift of emphasis that is needed now for such a center, or a shift of nearly urgency.
Well, I certainly feel that urgency, and I feel that urgency in the number of people who reached out to support sort of our work, and I feel that urgency because I think 3 out of 4 Americans are now saying racism is a big problem, and so now we're at a point in this country's history in which we are needing to really demonstrate to Americans that big solutions are necessary to solve those big problems, and so we're in a different sort of place than we were even 6 months ago, and so we're trying to, of course, respond to that.
The term anti-racism has triggered, one could nearly say, epiphanies for so many people. When did that term come into usage for you?
It really came into usage when I was writing Stamped from the beginning, and I decided to write. I decided to ensure that not only was I writing a history of anti-Black racist ideas, but I also wanted to chronicle those ideas that were challenging racist ideas over time. And I wanted people to know that, if you believe that people were products of their time because that's just what everybody believed, then that's just not true. And over the course of American history, there were people challenging racist ideas. They were, Thomas Jefferson was receiving letters from Benjamin Banneker directly challenging his ideas of Black intellectual inferiority. And so, and just as today, people change or people double down on their ideas, so too was that happening in 1790s and 1690s. So I wanted people to see that. But I realized that I couldn't sort of call those the opposite of those ideas. I couldn't call them not racist ideas, right, because typically the producers of those ideas, at least in today's terms, were calling them not racist. And so that's when I landed on the term anti-racist. And, you know, some scholars who had already been using the term, there had been a few books written using the term. Angela Davis in 1979 had famously said, it's not enough to be not racist, we must be anti-racist. And I thought that really encapsulated the word, the verbiage that was necessary, in that book.
Yeah, and you actually, as I recall, have a whole chapter on Angela Davis stamped from the beginning. But it's a term that, I mean, it's extraordinary, Ibram, to see the fervor with which it is used now, which makes me wonder, as you see this happening in front of your eyes, and as we see, the New York Times having you as having your book as number one for weeks now, do you sometimes worry of how it will continue, of how it is used, and perhaps how it is misused?
I don't, in the sense that, let me say specifically, I'm not concerned about it being misused because, and let me say, I'm not concerned about people taking the term, consciously sort of redefining it and using it as a weapon to undermine the very struggle that term is sort of connoting. Because that's what some people are going to do. And there's just nothing that can be utilized to there's really nothing that can be done to stop those people from doing that. People are going to weaponize my work. Just as I think they've weaponized the works of other folks who were undermining the white supremacy or racist power. What I am focused on is for those open-minded people, for those people who are truly serious about transforming this country, ensuring that my work reaches them and impacts them and that they can use it.
I love the term open-minded people. Do you feel that this moment actually is a portal?
That's what I hope. I mean, I hope it's a portal to policy change. I hope it's a portal to, that we're really at the beginning of really radically transforming this country. That, Americans, that Americans are indeed serious about building equity and justice, and that, literally this is the beginning of something. That's what I'm hoping, and I think in order for that to happen, we have to ensure that we're transforming policy and we're even transforming power.
Recently, on the Quarantine Tapes, I had Edwidge Danticat, and I read a piece she wrote in the New Yorker, which was published on June 15th of this year, and I'd like to read to you what she said and have you react. She says, the image of these police officers squeezing the life out of Floyd might serve as a metaphor for the way the U.S. administrations have for generations dealt with the countries many of us come from, through invasions, occupations, wars, the buttressing of dictators, and the removal of democratically elected governments, among other tactics. In the agony of his final moments while crying out for his mama, water, and breath, George Floyd reached out to and became all of us. He has joined a vast community of people across the globe who see echoes of the injustices and inequalities of their own societies in his American story and recognize their own torment in his suffering. To what extent can the framework of anti-racism, do you think, be productively applied to the study of foreign policy?
Well, I think first and foremost, there's not just racial disparities, and inequities and injustices within the United States and between races within the United States. There are disparities and inequities between, for instance, Europe and Africa, between darker and lighter people in much of Latin America, between lighter and darker people in much of Asia. And so there's this, this is really a global problem. And the question for the United States is, historically, has their foreign policies been reducing or upholding sort of global racial inequities? Have they been proceeding towards regime change as intensely in Europe as they have in Africa and Latin America? And do they view those nations in Europe as truly sovereign, which they wouldn't even think about regime change in Western Europe in ways that they do not view countries in Western Africa? And so those, those are the types of questions that a researcher would ask, when assessing America's foreign policy. And, I think for much of America's foreign policy, you had people of color in the United States and even around the world viewing themselves as almost political allies because they felt they were both being colonized by the U.S.
Coming back to the center you're creating, do you feel that the center will help you evolve?
Oh, I hope so. I think to create really a center of anti-racist activity, ultimately, I think it's going to help everyone who's part of that activity evolve. And if we're not certainly evolving, then we're not being and striving to be anti-racist.
I've been wondering, reading about your work and reading your work and reading really the response to your work, which has been truly extraordinary and I must say very heartening. If sometimes you feel uneasy about the spotlight that's on you in this moment.
Oh, of course. I'd rather be in a library somewhere or just writing.
Really? Yeah. It makes you feel uneasy. Do you feel uneasy because of what? Not only because you could be in a library where I would like to join you, but why?
I think I'm most comfortable away from the spotlight, and so I'd rather someone be reading something that I wrote rather than a light shining on me and them sort of listening to me. But then also, I want people to make this about the work, not me.
If you were in charge of the spotlight, let's assume for a moment you are, who would you put it on? And another way of putting it is, who would you want people to be reading?
So actually, I would want people to be reading. Certainly there are many great writers, but if I had the ability to really spotlight, it would really be reading the thoughts of people who are suffering the most under the weight of racism and white supremacy. And
who would that be?
Everyday people who, are working or not working and really suffering from food insecurity, suffering from police violence, suffering from housing insecurity, and on down the line.
Well, I really want to thank you very, very much for this moment. It's really been good to talk to you. And I wish so much success for your center, and I hope it shines a very, very bright, if tough light on what we need to do and what we really need to change, because hopefully we won't go back to normal.
Yes, hopefully not. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Great
so
to speak
much.
to you.
Take good care. Bye.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.